Okay, well, hi everybody. Welcome to Higher Word Speaker Series. And during the speaker series, we have the pleasure to get to know stories of nonprofits and religious leaders and the work on their amazing organizations. Before beginning our conversation today, we want to briefly introduce Higher Words and our guest speakers. Higher Words is a startup based in Silicon Valley that gives community-based organizations the ability to provide members with a credit card branded with the organization's logo. Essentially, each time members use the card, they support the organization financially because 2% of the members' daily transactions goes directly to the organization. My name is Shri, and I'm a business intern for Higher Words this summer.
My name is Mihir, and I'm also a business intern with Higher Awards this summer. Along with Shri, will be co-hosts for this conversation. At the end of our conversation, we'll have a short Q&A session with our speaker today, Ms. Mehra. So please feel free to drop your questions in our Zoom chat, and we'll be sure to answer them.
Yeah, and finally, we would like to welcome our guest speaker today, Ms. Kavita Mehra. Welcome, Ms. Mehra. Just to start off, can you tell us a little bit about your background and the inspiration for the work of Sakhi for South Asian women?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. It's great to speak with both of you and share the work that we do at Sakhi. Please feel free to call me Kavita. Ms. Mehra feels just a bit old. I'm not there yet, but I appreciate the form of respect. So Sakhi for South Asian Women, we work with survivors of gender-based violence, primarily from the South Asian diaspora here in New York City. And the survivors that we work with really live through a complex set of issues. Most of the survivors we work with are recent immigrants to the United States. And so navigating through the socio-political systems here in the United States while also being a survivor of trauma is duly complex. And so we work with those survivors primarily to support them through their healing process.
Amazing. It's great to hear about a huge organization that's rapidly expanding in New York City and dealing with, honestly, such an important issue in South Asian culture. So thank you for sharing that. And as the executive director of Sakhi, how has your leadership experience been shaped by the current circumstances due to COVID-19? And then also in particular, how is Sakhi still fostering that sense of inclusivity and community and uplifting survivors during these challenging times?
That's such a great question. I think that a lot of leaders at this moment are feeling particular angst and a great deal in terms of the challenges in front of us because we're dealing with the unknown. So to provide some context, Sakhi went remote on March 12th. And so that was probably like a week and a half before a lot of organizations and before even the public school system here in New York City. When we went remote, one of the first things that we realized was that this is going to be for the long haul. And we need to create structure, we need to create an environment, but we also need to over-communicate with our team. And that the more that we can foster communication internally, the greater comfort we can provide to team members, especially in this time of uncertainty. So we set up a Skype office pretty much in a day or two, and we were having team huddles. One of the first things that my colleagues were doing, those who work directly with survivors, was that they were doing safety planning with survivors. They knew that this is going to be in a particularly difficult time because survivors are going to be living with their perpetrators. And so safety planning really has to be key. Through the course of those conversations, a lot of things were coming up. And what was coming up was the angst and sort of like concern, very rightly so, around the economic stability that resulted from the pandemic, the housing insecurity that survivors are facing, the food insecurity that survivors are facing, and that overall, survivors just really aren't sure, especially those who don't have health insurance, which is a huge population that we work with. How are they navigating through this system? What came up for us then is, really listening to what survivors were asking for, what they were telling us, and responding accordingly. And so one of the things that I really am so grateful for my colleagues about was that they were uplifting survivors' voices in the midst of this really difficult moment. And that shifted our strategy. We needed to continue to be agile and pivot very quickly. And so that through the course of the last few months has been one of the greatest learning lessons, right? Like listening to your team, listening to what their needs are, listening to what survivors were telling us, and being able to demonstrate and sort of respond accordingly.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's so great to hear how Sakhi like continues to empower survivors, especially like in this difficult moment, as you mentioned, where like a lot of people have been forced back to go into environments that might have been like reasons for like problems or like issues in their life. And like I think it's so great that Sakhi is like providing them safety as well as like uplifting their voices in like a virtual environment right now. Yeah, and I was like really interested in Sakhi because like as an organization that looks to address domestic violence and abuse in a community in which like such values are like normalized and experiences are often silenced and like neglected, which is like just like the South Asian community and like kind of the way like that a lot of us have grown up. How is Sakhi working to empower individuals who have been like generally affected in the past and like been told to stay quiet in the past? And I know that you spoke a little bit about like how Sakhi works to like uplift those who often go unheard in this like mainstream society, but like how does like Sakhi in particular highlight this issue that is often overlooked in South Asian culture?
Yeah, that's so great. That's a great question. And so first and foremost, our philosophy is that survivors are their own agents of change. We are survivor-led, survivor-centered. And so we have survivors on our staff, we have survivors on our board, and we work with survivors every day. And so we believe that ultimately survivors have to drive their own life, right? And so we don't really uplift them, but we work with them. We don't really support them. What we're doing is really helping them think through what our opportunities or what could be in their life. So centering healing has been really part of our ethos, part of our process. In terms of like, what we see as transformative change, we see that happening through three mechanisms. The first is through community engagement. So conversations like this, right? Educating our larger community about why gender-based violence is such a pervasive issue in our community. The national average is that 1 in every 4 women experience gender-based violence in the United States. For the South Asian diaspora, it's 2 in every 5. Right. And so it is imperative for us to be able to discuss this epidemic, this silent epidemic that happens in our community. The second mechanism in which we see transformative change is really through political advocacy, and that's with a small piece. So it's educating elected officials about the challenges that survivors, particularly immigrant survivors, face. And then the third is really our work directly with survivors. So that's everything from mental health counseling to job coaching, job readiness, job employment, or supporting job employment. We have a strong transitional housing program, so we underwrite housing for several clients. We also have a whole component around advocacy, working with clients, so liaising with immigration attorneys, family law attorneys, really thinking about what like the challenges are in terms of being able to leave a perpetrator and working through those challenges. And then we have a robust food justice program, which has been really, really intense in the midst of this moment. So our approach is really to think holistically about every challenge that survivors might face in terms of their process for wanting to leave a perpetrator and trying our very best to address those challenges.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's really inspirational to hear how Sakhi has this platform and has these different, mechanisms that are really engaging community and advocacy, and more importantly, working directly with survivors. Like you said, not necessarily to uplift them, but to help them in their path, and in general to help educate everyone about this prevalent issue in South Asian culture. So thank you again for sharing that. And going off of like this idea of advocacy and working directly with survivors, currently Sakhi has a variety of different programs, from the newly established transitional housing program to your economic empowerment program, to your food justice program, to even a youth mental health counseling program. where you work with children of survivors. So can you share a particularly meaningful story or moment from one of these programs and why it resonated with you so much?
Well, that's a great question, and you clearly did your homework, so that's great. That's fantastic. I will say, and folks who know me, for me, the intersection of food security, especially in this moment, and survivorship and healing has really personally resonated with me. And so, right now, just to provide a little bit of context, 30 to 40% of food banks across New York City have shut down as a result of the pandemic. There's rampant food insecurity that's happening. That's actually another silent demon that really rests within the South Asian community, is how many people live below the poverty line and how many people cannot afford milk or fresh bread or fruit or vegetables. So when we went remote, we revamped our food justice program to start basically doing grocery delivery. So we source food from a wholesaler and package it up, and we distribute groceries anywhere from 50 to 100 survivors in a given week. So overall, I think we've distributed over 5,000 pounds of food since March, and we've delivered probably 150 to 175 groceries since the beginning of March. That being said, I remember this was probably in April. A survivor had sent me an email right after she got her grocery delivery and said, I just lost my job. I didn't know how I was going to make it. Thank you so much for this. And I remember reading that, and it was like one of those days where I was like in back-to-back meetings. It was like kind of intense, and it was like pretty early on in the pandemic, and I was trying to like think about how to build stability at Sakhi. And it just sort of dawned on me that while I'm in my own microcosm in this little bubble, that the impact of our work and the ripple effect of our work is so incredibly profound. And so we could do this work because of supporters, and it really does directly touch lives. So getting that email just resonated a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much for like sharing that as well. I think like one of the great parts of these speaker series that we've hosted is just like hearing personal stories about how these organizations, like if there's like hard evidence through like stories of how change is real and how it's like being implemented every day. And especially like what you said like resonates so much with like both Mehra and I, because it's so great to see like this organization making such a real difference in like an individual's life. And yeah, earlier you mentioned that community engagement and advocacy are some of like the main mechanisms of change at Sakhi. And here at Higher Awards, we are also all about empowering our community as well as those organizations who have already dedicated themselves to others. And we're more about like, we like look to like financially empower these organizations. And I was just wondering, like, can you speak more to how Sakhi continues to fund many of their initiatives? And in particular, what are like some financial challenges of running such a large scale nonprofit, especially like in today's like climate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, so for some context, we've grown considerably in the last few years. We've more than doubled. I want to say we've grown threefold, excuse me, in the last 3 years. We've had so when I first started, so back in 2017, like June 2017, our staff size was probably around 9 or 10. No, it was probably like 10, 11. And we're now approaching 20 people on the team. We're actually in the midst of hiring. So we've opened a second office. We have our current office in Manhattan, and we have a second office in Queens. We're projected to open a third office in Brooklyn in 2021. That being said, I think a lot of the challenges that nonprofit organizations face, particularly in the midst of this recession and what we will continue to face, is advocating for what's called general operating support. So in the corporate sector, money is not allocated toward a particular division or a particular pool, right? And it's not restricted. In the nonprofit sector, unfortunately, the way that our businesses function is that a significant part of funding is restricted. So oftentimes government funding is restricted, particular foundation support is restricted. The most important and the hardest money to sort of raise is what's called general operating support. It's unrestricted funds. I would say that to get through this moment, I would advocate for individuals, foundations, and to the best of its capacity, any government funder, although it probably would be impossible, to think about what unrestricted funding could look like and unlocking that for nonprofits, because it is transformative. We were able to be agile and really think on our feet and respond to the community's needs because we thought very much about unrestricted funding and fundraising around unrestricted funding. But that's a luxury. That's a real privilege. A lot of organizations don't have that privilege. And so I have colleagues in the field who have to run nonprofits, and 90% of their funding is restricted. And so that really prevents them from being able to respond to crises in a way that they need to. And so that I think would be my greatest position.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's a common struggle that a lot of nonprofits go through, is figuring out how to financially, keep their initiatives and programs sustainable for long-term impact. So it's great to hear you, talking about this outlet to, and this pathway to kind of pursue unrestricted funding, because it is super important to discuss. And, just to let you know, here at Higher Awards, we have this credit card where, you go to a grocery store and you pay this 2% with your card, and it goes directly to an organization like Sakhi. So there's no restriction on it, no fees attached. And that's something that I think we really love about it. And that's why we hope to really empower nonprofits such as yourself. So thank you so much. It's truly inspiring to hear how Sakhi's expanded also to other boroughs in New York City, and how you've had such a profound impact throughout New York City. With this outreach, it's great to see how all of your different initiatives help survivors and their immediate loved ones lead a better life. So for that, the entire team at Higher Awards thanks you, Kavita, for coming on today. And we're going to transition to a short question and answer session. So we do have one question right now from our COO, Jacob Kipp. He couldn't be here today, but he sent me the question in advance of the conversation. So he also noted that you guys have been growing to different boroughs in New York City. So he wanted to ask, where do you see Sakhi's growth trajectory 10 years from now? Like, where do you see Sakhi expanding potentially outside of New York City? And why do you see this expansion happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those sort of folks who it's like grow or die. So I knew that was something that was really important to me when I started this role 3 years ago. I would like us to have offices in the community, and so shifting our model to really think about what that looks like. Having an office in Manhattan, it's not where our community lives. So ideally, shifting to outside, in addition to Queens and Brooklyn, hopefully one day in the Bronx. And then in 10 years, when I think about the trajectory of our work, I think we're going to need to try to do more national organizing. There are South Asian women's organizations across the country. And for us, while we've been active and having conversations with many of the South Asian women's organizations across the country, I think that there really needs to be sort of some larger coalition or larger umbrella group that would allow for us to be able to lobby for efforts that are impacting South Asian survivors across the country.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that, as well as everything that you share with us today. Mihir and I definitely appreciate you being here with us today so much. Yeah, and it's so inspiring to hear how Sakhi has expanded to have such a profound impact throughout New York City by helping thousands of South Asian women and survivors. And finally, we want to extend a huge thank you to everyone who is going to join this amazing conversation and watch this from their homes. We hope that the work of Sakhi inspires you, because it definitely has inspired me and me here. And we encourage everyone to continue supporting their local communities and empowering those who've been countlessly dedicating themselves to others and their community. Yeah, we appreciate everyone for hopefully tuning in like the future. And you can follow Sakhi for South Asian Women and their work at sakhi.org and on their social media pages at Sakhi NYC. Last but not least, Higher Words is all about sharing stories and empowering communities and individuals who have been dedicating their lives to others. If you wish to learn more about Higher Words and how we work to financially empower and uplift nonprofits and religious organizations, please visit higherwords.com. And please make sure to follow our social media pages at Higher Words to see our work. Thank you so much again, Kavita, for being here. And finally, we would like to send each of you love, health, and happiness during these difficult times.